Serious, what disturbing thing did you find out about someone after they died? When my step-grandmother died, we found out she was unloading my grandfather's money to her daughter who was born from her previous marriage. My grandfather was in cognitive decline in his later years and his health was failing. She got him to sign all kinds of things. She bought her daughter's $200K house for $1, 8 meters, put it in her name, so her daughter could keep living there. $9, 999 gifts every year to her daughter and grandkids. Bought their cars. Investments in her name that would transfer to her daughter when she died. Over a 5-year period she was able to transfer close to $8 million. Every time we would see her she would talk about how great it was to have family. How wonderful it was that everyone got together, etc. She acted like the sweetest old lady while the entire time she was ripping off my family. Every time we saw her daughter, who lived in another state, she was the nicest person to us while taking all of the money. She truly expected to outlive the old man. Everybody did. And she had everything set up perfectly. Except she died before he did. Just died of natural causes in her sleep. Shocked everyone. I mean, you had this frail old man who couldn't stay awake for more than an hour at a time. That was reliving memories from 75 years ago every time you spoke to him, and a vibrant, granted elderly, healthy lady he was married to, and he outlived her. By the time she died my grandfather was in really bad shape, mentally and physically. We had to clean out her things, and we found all of the paperwork, every last detail. He couldn't comprehend what she had done, and after trying to tell him about it a couple of times, we stopped trying. Nothing could be done legally. Her daughter was set for life. When there is money involved, people become vultures. Was much left at that point? Only the amount set aside in his will, but only because that money was set aside in a trust she couldn't access. Not really disturbing, but after my grandpa died, my mom told me he once abandoned my mother and grandma for 1 year before he came back. My grandpa, whom I loved dearly and was my favorite, used to beat the absolute crap out of my nan and their children, and that's why my mother and siblings hated him. Really wish I had known this earlier, as so many things I never understood finally make so much sense. Got a strange vibe from the family after my grandfather's long battle with cancer and ultimate passing. Turns out, I was the only one he hadn't beaten. This is actually quite common. That my mother had an affair, and I'm the product. Man involved had no idea I exist. Didn't find out from my mother, because she died when I was 15. Found out at the age of 21 from my aunt. We should start a product of an affair club. My mom finally confessed it to me when I was 22. My entire family knew and no one told me, which felt really weird. Yes, we should. I'm the same, and found out when my dad died when I was 14. I thought my parents were separated. And as a kid my dad was traveling on business most of my childhood. My mom thought I'd figured it out, but I had no idea. I never told her I didn't know. She never knew how devastated I was. She also died shortly after. My dad was married and had a whole other family in another city. I was devastated. The only good thing is he was in my life as a child and always supported us. How does someone choose to live like that? I can't imagine the stress of juggling 2 families. Lol, I was so angry when he died when I was younger, but as an adult was fascinated on how he juggled all that. Haha. Would be a lot harder today with all of the social media, etc. But would still be pretty difficult. I remember my parents had a second phone line in their room. That was his business phone, and I was to keep very quiet when he was on business calls. It was years later that I realized that was his line his family called him on while he was in our city. It was very unusual in the 70s to have a second phone line. My grandmother was raped, and my oldest aunt isn't my grandfather's child. My grandfather came back from fighting on the Yorktown during WW2 and my grandmother was pregnant. They married and he never once denied my aunt or treated her any different. In fact, my dad says she was the favorite. We only found out about it when my grandmother was close to death. She told my dad. She held on to that secret until she was 93 years old. My aunt and grandfather have both been gone since the early 2000s. Edit. I know that none of my cousins from my aunt have done the DNA test things because my family is super Mormon and has our family traced back as far as possible, so there is no need for them to do it. My aunt's widower adds new family on when someone gets married / gives birth / remarried, etc. Your grandfather sounds like he was a great guy. My grandpa was like that with his stepkids. Their dad abandoned them, but he made sure they had Christmas and birthday presents from him until they all sat him down to let him know they knew who they were really from and they appreciated getting a real father the second time around. I live in an apartment building and there's a big family who live in the several apartments upstairs. A patriarch with several children and all his children have families who live in neighboring apartments. A few years ago the patriarch passed away, and it was only then that his family found out he had a whole other secret family that he's maintained for at least 20 years. I'm guessing that the guy was unoriginal with the names of all the kids in the secret family. This is Meter. After one of my best friends died, I found out how he became sick. I knew he had HIV. He told me really early in our friendship, but he really avoided that topic since he didn't like to be seen as a sick person or as a burden. He did not ask for help when he needed it, and he ended up having complications and dying because of it. He had the intention to say goodbye to only 4 friends and talk to them before dying. Sadly, he died a couple days before we met. He already knew he was about to die, but he didn't want to tell me before we saw each other. After he passed away, his brother called me to let me know and to talk about what my friend wanted to tell me. That's where I found out how he got HIV. He had been raped when he was really young, and he did not know he was HIV+ until a couple years later. He never wanted to tell us because of the same reason he never talked about him being sick. He didn't like the idea of being a victim. This broke my heart, and I understood so much about him after knowing this. I really hate when the good people die and have really bad lives, but the bad people live and have nothing bad happen to them. What happened to the rapist? As far as I know, my friend never told anyone who this person was. He knew, since he worked with this person, but the name never came up. When I was a kid, my dad told me that his dad had died from being electrocuted. My whole childhood he raised me and my siblings to be very cautious around electricity. When my grandmother was on her deathbed, she confessed to me that how my dad's father really died was autoerotic asphyxiation. It was the 60s, so the fire department in their small town helped cover it up. I don't ever want to hear my grandmother says the words autoerotic asphyxiation. My aunt was a single mom who constantly had new boyfriends moving in and out of her house, which I always found weird because my aunt was also super religious and judgmental about the sex lives of others. The part one found out only after my aunt died is that one of the boyfriends sexually abused my female cousin. And when my aunt found out about it, she blamed her own daughter and called her a rest for letting it happen. My cousin told this to me at her mom's / my aunt's funeral. Meanwhile, other relatives judge my cousin and say she was a bad daughter because my cousin moved far away when she was an adult and rarely had contact with her mom. The best lesson I've learned from this is never judge a person because they are distant from their parents. They may have a very good reason. I went to one of those fancy New England prep schools that has had to release reports about the sex abuse committed by teachers and faculty. 2 of my teachers who had since retired, I graduated back in the aughts, died within a few months of each other. Days after the second one passed, the school released a report that named them both among others. They had both remained employed for many years after abusing students despite having been reported to the school by the students at the time. That's dark. A girl I went to HS with died in a horrible car accident. It was early morning on a summer break Saturday. No alcohol or drugs involved. We all assumed she fell asleep. I found out later that year that she had an anonymous blog where she posted several times throughout the years that she wanted to commit suicide crashing her car. According to her parents, friends and teachers, she never showed any suicidal tendencies. It always baffled me how you can have all this mind process and nobody could guess it. A friend of mine exhibits suicidal tendencies, and she's quite open about it, albeit in a funny way. But nobody's ready to accept this. Not even her family. She spilt it in front of her mom. Or nothing funny there. God forbid. If something happens, All everyone's gonna say is, my god, she was always so happy. She never seemed suicidal to me. That being said, I've taken her to a specialist. She's been on light medication for 2 weeks and is doing better. Thank you for really seeing her and helping her out. You're a good friend. We need more people like you in the world.